thought that France was the welfare queen this whole time? As soon as Africa cut them off, nationalized their resources, and built their own social programs, the French government collapsed.
Africa is the only reason why Western Europeans get to enjoy such a high quality of life, especially for France. They brag about being able to live well even though they don't have to work as hard as Americans, but they omit the fact that all that comfort they enjoy comes off of the back of African resources and labor.
Who would have thought that France was the welfare queen this whole time? As soon as Africa cut them off, nationalized their resources, and built their own social programs, the French government collapsed. But the Western media will blame their budget deficit or the way Parliament is set up. But let me tell you what's really going on. Their Prime Minister had proposed taking 60 billion euros from their reserves to close the budget deficit. But keep in mind that the reserves are the African gold they pillaged, and that pipeline is closing since Burkina Faso nationalized their gold and pushed them out. So when they said let's use the reserves, all hell broke loose and the Prime Minister was removed. Then France had an energy crisis. 70% of its electricity comes from nuclear power or uranium. Now Western media is going to tell you the price went up because of Russia's war in Ukraine. But Niger supplies 20% of all European uranium. So when Niger told Orano, a French nuclear company, to halt all production, they disrupted France's entire energy sector. Then while they will paint Africa as the place that needs foreign aid, what we have learned about the French economy is that they've been spending money like their colonies will always be there. They have been in Africa since the 1600s. All those people, all those resources that they stole. And apparently they don't know how to manage their money. So now that there is a global push to make Western economies more conservative, Western media blames France's social programs for their budget deficit. They want to use France as a test case for why their economy should be more capitalist, more corporate run, more conservative. But the real problem is that Europe has been a welfare state for centuries, supplied by Africa and its other colonies. And we have taken away the empire's subsidy. So as Africa reclaims price, policy, and production, France won't fix its books by attacking welfare. They'll either have to exchange imperialism for fair trade or crumble altogether.
Guys, the French government has just officially collapsed, and now the country is on the brink of nationwide protests. In fact, the French population is so frustrated with the government's instability and negligence that they are now planning massive shutdowns with the aim to halt the country's entire economy for a day, saying, "Let's block everything."
What a first day for France's new Prime Minister. Nationwide protests over the direction of government and their proposed cuts. He is, after all, the fifth person to hold that office in less than 2 years. So while Sébastien Lecornu was handed power, more than 175,000 people took to the streets in towns and cities nationwide. A happy accident that an event planned months ago fell on a day epitomising the political chaos they were protesting against. In Paris this morning, police dressed from head to toe in battle gear looked bemusedly on, incongruous against the dancing protesters singing for them to be calm and go home. At a time of great domestic weakness, President Macron couldn't allow the protests to get out.
Africa is the only reason why Western Europeans get to enjoy such a high quality of life, especially for France. They brag about being able to live well even though they don't have to work as hard as Americans, but they omit the fact that all that comfort they enjoy comes off of the back of African resources and labor. England, Portugal, Germany, Belgium, Italy, and France all made a massive scramble for Africa in the 1880s, and France by far still has their foot in their old colonial ways. Even though these African nations have declared their independence, France and a couple other countries are still exploiting them, and they have given nothing in return to these African nations. They have built very little in infrastructure and construction. They have given next to nothing compared to how much they have taken to support their ways. Out of the 8 African coups that have happened since 2020, 7 of them were from French colonies. The French do not know how to build, they do not know how to innovate, they do not know how to grow democracy in any part of the world, which is why for the past 60, 70 years, they have just had French puppets that were ruling these African countries that finally got sick of how they were being treated. China has only taken an interest in Africa for 30 or 40 years, yet they have built more industry and infrastructure than all of the other European countries combined. So of course, the African nations are going to have a much more favorable disposition towards China, since they are the ones who are actually building factories, roads, bridges, hospitals. China is actually divesting a lot of their own resources to make this possible. And you guys know how I feel about a lot of Chinese policy, but they did hit the nail on the mark when it comes to Africa. It is pretty clear that Russia's Wagner forces have had a lot to do with the coups that have taken place in Gabon, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And even though the Russians aren't trying to actually help anyone, I believe they are trying to foment chaos and destabilize a lot of positions in the West. This can be an overall good thing for Central Africa. Even though the Russians' goal is to create a lot of instability for the West, this instability can spread to a lot of other African countries, and that can actually hurt a lot of China's positions there. Make no mistake, despite what you're seeing in the media, the US will find a way to exploit whatever is happening in Africa. At first, they seemed that they were very pro taking down the Niger coup, and now they've kind of backed off and they said that they are going to respect the current government. No, a lot of these African nations don't have a favorable viewing of the United States. The US will always find a way to profit off of whatever instability is caused. If there is going to be a disruption in the energy supply, I will bet you that the US will make money selling its liquid natural gas and oil. If there is going to be widespread war, the US is going to make a lot of money selling its weapons. I would not put it past the United States interests to have their cake and eat it too. They may be happy about China building all of this infrastructure because that means the US doesn't have to. It means the US doesn't have to invest in anything to make Africa more prosperous and rich, but they can reap all of the benefits for when that actually happens. In my opinion, I think that every Western interest should be kicked out of every African country and then reintroduced as a potential trading partner among peers with equal standing, instead of these African nations having to deal with the West like guaranteed exploiters.
Hello brothers and sisters, and welcome to yet another interesting episode. I hope you're doing fine wherever you're tuning in from. From where I am or from where I sit, I am doing extremely well. I am extremely happy because today, more than ever, Africa is rising and Africans are finally awake. And it is evident that now we are probably witnessing a great empire falling. I'm talking about France. The economy in France is currently falling, and it is simply because African countries have decided to kick out Western interests. And that is when we realized, that's when the world realized that France is one of the biggest welfare queens in the whole world. France has been depending on African countries. They have been depending on African resources, just stealing from Africa, getting these resources for free, manipulating African leaders and getting away with our resources. And for a very long time, Africa has been seen as a poor country, yet in real life, it is the richest continent. You know, Africa has 54 countries and has so many resources, but it still stands as the poorest continent in the whole world. But that is not the case, because Africa is the richest place on earth. And the reason why Africa is poor is because of its riches, and because countries like France will not stop exploiting Africa. But while this is the case, the Western media is trying to hide all this and trying to cover up this story. It's now blaming France's social welfare programs, saying that France is falling because of its social programs. Listen to the cover-up story that's being given.
France is spending over 500 billion euros per year on welfare. That's over 30% of the entire economy spent on people who are not working and are not contributing to the system at all. Yet the Prime Minister had the courage to come out yesterday proposing to cut 2 public holidays to address the debt issue, because France is drowning in debt. They have a debt to GDP of over 120%, and they're running annual deficits of around 6%. That's wartime deficits. So the only real or viable solution the government has at this point is to cut on spending, which of course they don't want to do, because why would you stop spending somebody else's money? So they're coming out with these gimmicks of cutting public holidays, and they're eventually going to come with a proposal to hike taxes even more, which France really cannot do because they already have one of the highest tax burdens in the entire European Union and developed world, for that matter.
But while that's what they claim, more and more Africans are waking up to the fact that the French economy was built off their backs. French people, or the France as a whole nation, they do not want African countries to grow. They want African countries to stagnate so that they can keep on exploiting the African economy or the African resources. They want to keep on mining out of Africa for free. You know, when Ibrahim Traore decided to make education free in his country, Burkina Faso, the French Empire was not happy. The Francophone government was not happy at all. If anything, they want kids to miss education so that they can have more kids in quarries. They can have more kids mining in their own quarries, because while that is going on, there is nothing that they're willing to do. They're not willing to help these kids. If anything, they are willing to build wealth. They're willing to keep their economy standing, and their citizens are benefiting from these welfare programs off the backs of children in Africa who are suffering. They're not willing to help these kids. If anything, they are willing to do anything to keep Africa stagnated.
This issue of Burkina Faso and Captain Ibrahim Traore has suddenly become one of the biggest political issues in the world, trending regularly on social media. My own interview with our dear friend and guest Nico House on this very subject, literally on this exact subject, is one of our biggest, most viewed clips in all the history of the mother of all talk shows. It's in the millions. Millions of people have watched it on all platforms, including pirates by the dozen going out on TikTok, which is now a pretty regular thing. We're not always able to keep track of them in order to count them and claim the credit for them, but I can say that millions have watched what Nico House said and what I said about Captain Traore. It's even worse than you said, Amy. He didn't just accuse Captain Ibrahim of stealing Burkina Faso's gold. He accused him of stealing Burkina Faso's gold to pay for his own protection. Well, I wonder why he would need protection. Well, one of the obvious reasons is that both France and the United States are quite clearly committed to killing him. What is it about Captain Traore that they want to kill? Well, in addition to the great strides forward that you have adumbrated, this very week, the Burkina Faso government abolished all education fees. It is now free to go to nursery, primary, secondary, and university in Burkina Faso.
So, France, let me ask you something. What was the plan? Where did you think this plan was going? You built your economy off of uranium you didn't mine. You built your economy over lights you didn't pay for. And you built your economy off of power from a land whose people still live in the dark. You flew first class off the fuel that never touched your soil, and you called that a partnership? Now look at you. Your lights are flickering, your industry is choking, your arrogance is gasping for air. And why? Because Niger said no, because Burkina Faso said not anymore, and because Mali looked you in the eye and said, you're not welcome here.
Now, as more and more African countries are realizing this, they are now switching allies, switching from Western countries or from countries like France to Russia. More and more African countries are realizing this, and they are now pledging allegiance with Russia, which is not making these Western countries or Western powers happy. If anything, more African countries are kicking out Western interests. It all began when Ibrahim Traore decided to kick out the France colonies or the France troops. You know, France had so many troops in Western countries and in Central African countries. You know, they had their troops in Mali, they had their troops in Niger, they had their troops in Burkina Faso. And one may ask himself, or you may ask yourself one question: why does France choose to have its military troops in all these African countries. They have their military bases in these African countries and will do everything to keep them there. And when Ibrahim Traore decided to kick them out, that's when hell broke loose for them. That's when they started having problems. And that is something that the Western media will not talk about. They'll only talk about chaos erupting in France and blame their socialist principles or their socialist systems and tell them to implement more capitalist systems. But in real sense, France has just been exploiting Africa, and when Africa said no to the exploitation, that's why the France or the French economy is collapsing at the moment. So Africa is increasingly saying no to neocolonialism, and that's why somebody may even argue that the French people or the French government has nothing, has no good interest for African people. And if anything, they are willing to kill any African or to assassinate any African leader who comes or blocks the welfare that they get from Africa. So if anything, French or the France as a country, the Francophone people are the biggest welfare queens in the whole world. But anyway, those are just my thoughts. Please let me know what your thoughts are concerning all these in the comment section. I'd be really glad to read what your thoughts are. Let me know. Let's have that conversation going. Let's keep talking. Otherwise, that's all I have for you today. If you did enjoy the video, then please give this video a thumbs up and also consider supporting this channel by sharing the video and by subscribing to this channel. Otherwise, I hope to be seeing you in the next video. Until then, peace, love, and black power.